Bruce, let me do brief introductions of these two. Phyllis Ellis, as I've written here, is a force of nature, as you can see from the film. She's an Olympian herself. She was a member of the Canadian women's field hockey team, the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. She's an award-winning actor in theater, film, and television. She's a motivational speaker. She teaches young Indigenous kids on Manitoulin Island. She's a mother. She was once married to an NHL hockey player. And, of course, she's a multi-award-winning filmmaker, hey? And she's been making films all around the world for 5 years. So that's why I say she's a force of nature.
She's just, nothing, I'll tell you later.
I've had the pleasure of executive producing 3 films that Phyllis has directed. One was called Painted Land, about the group of 7 working in Algoma, north of the Sioux. A film called Girls' Night Out, about the young women's binge drinking young women and the dangers of that, and Toxic Beauty, which has been seen by more than 44 million people around the world. It's an extraordinary film. And then here's Bruce Kidd, who's a national treasure, really, Bruce. He won 18 national championships in Canada, the US, and the UK in the early 1960s. In the mile, 3 mile, 6 mile, and cross country running. He won gold and bronze medals at the 62 Commonwealth Games. He represented Canada at the 64 Olympics in Tokyo. And he started running as a student here at U of T, and was recently the principal at U of T Scarborough, and he's now the U of T's ombudsman. So, there's a beautiful 10-minute film about Bruce Kidd called Runner, which you can watch for free anytime on the NFB website.
That's old.
A short film about a long-distance runner. It's a beautiful film.
No more copyright.
And he wrote a great book called A Runner's Journey, sort of a memoir, right? Which just came out a year or 2 ago. Anyway, so I'm going to start by asking Phyllis, who's a very brave, courageous woman, seem attracted to making films about brave, courageous women. What drew you to making this particular film?
Let me take these off, because this is neoprene and it's hot. So I quit sport many years ago, and I didn't retire. I want to identify clearly that I quit. And had my own, sexual assault and abuse and, emotional, psychological, physical, as you do when you're a woman athlete in any country, I believe. And so left. And I was on the outside, and I started working in film, and then followed Castor Semenya. What had happened to Castor. Bruce and I always say Bruce taught me how to be a feminist. I've known him since I was 17. And I reached out, and he introduced me to Dr. Peyoshni Mitra, who's the extraordinary activist in the film, and Katrina Kazarkas, the author. And then I met the women. And you can't unknow what you know and what you learn, and then the film starts talking back to you, and then you have to follow it, and here we are. Here we are.
It's as another film. It's great to have a good idea, but how do you raise the dough, and who supported you in making this film?
Well, TVO was the broadcaster. So in Canada, you get a broadcast license, and then that triggers a whole bunch of other money. Not a whole bunch, but other money. And the and Rogers Fund, CMF, I guess, same. And Ontario Creates, and a little bit of private money. It was an expensive film to make because we traveled all over the world. I also think too, just to answer your first question, it's we get to a certain age, and no is not a sentence. It's no period. That's it. And to be able to be part of the conversation or contribute to the conversation for young women from whatever sector, but especially for me, having been an athlete, to empower us all to be able to say no, young women to say no, no matter what it is, no matter where it is. And I think that, and watch Annette Nagesa, who suffered so much, as you saw in the film, who's now an activist and advocate, and is working with young women for that very thing, to say no. She didn't know that that was an option at the time. And as we speak today, there are many, many athletes in Africa, right today, right now, that are facing this very problem in this moment.
So, you've been involved in athletes' rights a lot, human rights, all your life. How did you respond to the film? How much were you involved in the making of the film, first of all?
I don't think I was involved very much in the making of the film, although I heard stories from Phyllis along the way, and late in the film, I think it was, she came to my house and did that interview in the backyard.
Yeah.
But I've been involved in this struggle for the last 10 or 12 years, and Peyoshni Mitra and Katrina are friends and colleagues. In fact, I just sent a message off to Peyoshni as the credits rolled, and was very much involved in that struggle. In fact, I mean, it's incredible about how activism is often enabled by networks and being in the right place at the right time. And it's hard to believe, but after Dutti was suspended by Athletics India, Peyoshni reached out to her. And when Dutti said, "I'd like to fight this," Peyoshni emailed Katrina, and Katrina emailed me and said, what can we do to fight this? And at that very moment, I was the chair of a policy advisory body called the Commonwealth Advisory Body on Sport, and was at a meeting of the sports ministers around one of these horseshoe tables, with the ministers on the inside and then the senior officials and the less important officials and the lowly academics. But I was sitting right behind the Indian delegation. And when I got the message from Katrina at the coffee break in the morning, I went up to the minister and said, a very important Indian athlete has been suspended unfairly in a way that brings great disgrace to India. Why don't you stand up for her, and why don't you help us fight that? And he said, can't do that. But at lunch, came over to me and said, I've thought what you said and we're thinking about it. And at the tea break 2 hours later, came back to me and said, if you help us find a lawyer, because I don't think we can get a lawyer in India without paying a tremendous amount of money, a lawyer who would do it on a pro bono basis, I think we can work together to support her in a fight at CAS. I didn't know anybody, but I called a friend in Canada and said, who's the best Canadian lawyer who has experience at CAS? And they Marie-Claude Asselin of the Sport Dispute Resolution Center of Canada said, there's a young lawyer, he looks about 14, but he's terrific. His name is Jim Bunting. And I called him and he said, I'd love to do it, and I'll get my firm, Weir Folds, to support the cost. And all of that happened. And Jim recruited another lawyer, and you saw the film, how they fought that case. It's an incredible
Good
story.
for you. That's fantastic. I didn't realize that.
Incredible story.
So, has anything changed since the credits of this film, which was completed a while ago? I mean, what's
you
happening?
know, there's no decision from the European Court of Human Rights. And there's nothing to change the lives of the women whose competitive opportunities have been either obliterated or distorted by this, horrible 2018 ruling. However, the IOC is moving. I'm reluctant to say this with confidence because they promised a lot and not delivered very much.
It won't be quoted, don't worry.
No, but they've set out in November of last year a very ambitious human rights framework. And after years of what you saw in the film, saying that the United Nations regime of human rights doesn't apply to us, we're outside of that, which was the basis for the Cass decision not to take human rights into effect, which basically killed Castor's defense. The IOC is saying in stages we want to embrace human rights and insist the international federations do that as well.
They don't. Yes, they have. They say we're not going to sex test. We're not going to discriminate. We're going to include. However, each individual sport governing body, each federation, gets to make their own decision. You guys
that is true of their policy on athletes with differences of sexual development and trans athletes. But the most recent so thinking out loud, I don't see the IOC stepping in to protect DSD and trans athletes right away. But I do see them, or at least they've now promised, to apply a regime of human rights to the IFs and the NOCs in stages. If they do that, then that will open the possibility for appeals against IFs like World Athletics on the grounds of human rights. And of course, it's not just World Athletics, it's FIFA, it's FINA. The other strategy that people are pursuing, and we're pursuing here in Canada, is to get national governments that have embraced human rights, like Canada, to say that henceforth we will not allow major games to come to Canada unless there is an agreement in advance that human rights will be respected and enforced. In 2010 in Vancouver, 2009, 2010, women up until the last Olympics, the ski jump event was only for men. And a group of Canadian and US women ski jumpers, one of whom was the best ski jumper in the world, regardless, went into court, sought an injunction in BC court to prevent that event from going ahead unless women had an opportunity. And they were turned down on the grounds that the contract between the IOC and the organizing committee said it was the IOC's rules, not Canadian law, that prevailed. And so we need to find a way to make sure that that never happens again. And people are pressing the Canadian government with a number of, one of the lawyers, and I'm going on too long, but it's one of the lawyers, Jim Bunting's assistant, Carlos Sayo, tried to do this for the World Swimming Championships in Toronto last September on the case of trans athletes. But the problem with doing a test case is that you need an athlete or you need someone who will be the subject of the test case, and couldn't find anybody for that. The other way of doing it is to get a preemptive declaration to say you can't come to Canada unless, so we're working on that.
Bruce and I sent a letter.
Yeah.
And the film can play a role in all this, I think. I mean, to talk about, you've been showing the film at Human Rights Watch film festivals, London.
All over the place. But
including at The Hague later on this week.
The Hague, Movies That Matter. It's a great festival.
It is. Yeah, so it's been having its own impact. So it's the kind of film that just people watch and they respond and they feel something, whatever they feel, and then they sometimes respond. You know, what can we, you know, who do we write to, or what do I hashtag out, or you know, how is this possible, you know, and so yeah, we've screened in a lot of important festivals, and Movies That Matter is next week, and they have 70 films, 8 they pick. Peyoshni is being honored as one of the top 8 activists, as she should be.
Fantastic.
And I think that you know, we sort of think of it, our sort of ad is, our thing is movie to movement. So you know, how do you take a film and use a film, and how does the film become utilized? And because it's not the film. Yeah, it's a nice looking film, and it's great that, and we should cut it, and it's you know. Okay. But really, what it is a whole bunch of extraordinary people in one place at one time.
Right.
And so that you get to watch all of these people tell you the story, instead of having to go to all the different websites or all the different, you know, articles or studies, right? So it's just a great focus for impact.
And now it can be a tool for change. Catherine.
I was just wondering, the athlete who went through surgery, which is just a horrific story. Outside of even the sport lens of the film, I mean, is there any loss? It won't ever fix what has happened, but could address injustice. Is there any kind of a lawsuit? I mean, I don't even understand the mechanics of how somebody says you have this surgery and then you go to this clinic, and then like to be able to compete. Could you just explain, because it just seems like such a gross injustice. I'm just trying to follow the thread of how that even happened.
Well, based on the knowledge that I have acquired from all the experts. So Annette was a young Ugandan athlete, Uganda's Athlete of the Year. She was preparing to go to the London Olympics. At that time, World Athletics, IAAF, was targeting women that had had success in races, and Annette was targeted. And so they brought her to France. Dr. Berman, who you saw in the film, didn't really get to meet him. And they tested these young women, and she was identified with high level of testosterone. And rather than, I mean, one of the options was, one of the options the women are given is they go on hormone treatment to lower their testosterone. They're perfectly healthy. They don't need to go on any medication. There's nothing wrong with them, but they put them on medication. But a really quick fix and a forever fix is to remove the parts of their body that produce hormones and genitally mutilate them. So if you think, if that's really what it was. So that's what a clitorindectomy is. So, which has nothing to do with testosterone, it has nothing to do with anything. So that's what happened to Annette. And then they told her it'll only take a couple of weeks, you'll get fixed, and then you'll be back training again. And so this young woman who had support and really nobody to ask at that moment in her life thought, well, gosh, I better go ahead and have the surgery. But they didn't explain to her what was going to happen. She had no idea that this is what was going to happen. And then they left her, because when you have those kinds of surgeries and you don't go on hormone replacement, you basically don't have any hormones. So then you get osteoporosis, then you have brain fog, then you have no ability to feel pleasure. You have a lot, you've lost everything. And then you decide to come forward and speak about it, and you have to leave your country, because in your country you could get killed or put in jail. So then she has to then seek asylum in Berlin, where she has no family, has some friends, but, you know, and have a whole new language that she doesn't speak, and that's where she's living now in Berlin, with the support of a lot of people that have been, you know, befriended her and are staying with her, but, you know, her entire life. And that is, there are other athletes that this has happened to under the guise of level playing field or fair play.
So there's a political demand by activists for compensation reparation. There does not seem to be enough grounds to pursue a legal case. And I'm not sure of all of the ins and outs in French law of why that's not. But I mean, it was done in a French hospital. They claim they had.
And that was Uganda.
That's right, but it was done in a French, like charging them with kidnapping, charging them with mutilation, the abuse of her rights. There doesn't seem to be a strong case for that. Roger Pilkey, whom you saw in the film, is putting together a campaign to question the academic and medical license enjoyed by the 8 men who signed the article. I mean, the extraordinary thing is that they published an article describing what they did. And so there's an effort underway to see whether or not they can be their credentials can be taken away from them. And I think the ultimate hope is that if there's the ultimate hope would be to get the IAAF Council to vote for compensation. Mm-hmm. It's a very rich IF to do that, but there'd have to be a political change for that to happen.
Yeah, because it seems to me that, Phyllis, what you were saying is they said this, and I guess my question is, who's the they?
The World Athletics, which was the IAAF before, and their doctors. So they're doctors that Dr. Ben Berman and his team. So, and that's operation happened in Uganda. That's another part of the issue, because they were able to distance themselves, but there's enough documentation, and there's one document, the redacted document in the film, that says we're waiting to hear from Dr. Berman. He denies doing it, but right in the redacted hospital document from Uganda, you see Berman's name. And they made a big mistake, but they allowed me to come to a symposium in Washington. They wouldn't let me bring a camera in, but I was one of maybe 30 or 40 people in this room. And there was the positive side defending the regulations. They were defending the regulations, and there was people, experts that were against the regulations, sex testing, testosterone testing. And Stefan Berman got up in front of everyone with Maria Patino, who you saw in the film, and said, I quote, I don't know why they wouldn't want to have operations or change how they look. If they want to look like women, I don't know why they wouldn't do it. And Pilkey was there, and everybody was there. Not everybody, but a lot of people. I have it on my phone. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh yeah, please use the mic for recording.
So under the argument of having a level playing field, some of the other female athletes were saying that they thought it was unfair that athletes who had higher testosterone were competing, they were competing against them. And I wondered if in the realm of male athletes that has been the case too. Have male athletes been saying that it's unfair to other male athletes who have higher testosterone levels?
I couldn't hear you perfectly.
Sure. I just wondered whether male athletes have argued that it's unfair to compete against other male athletes with higher testosterone levels.
Not natural testosterone. Injected, swallowed, but not natural testosterone. And generally speaking, the natural advantages that male athletes enjoy and the economic advantages that are taken for granted as part of sport. So when I was running in the early 1960s, as the African running revolution began, and it became clear that people who were born and lived at high altitude had a beneficial adaptation to running in thin air. There was nobody who said they should be forced to
Remove a lung.
Live at sea level.
or live at sea level and so on. And it's true on the economic side. In some of these debates, I'd like to point out that the most important factor overall in athletic success is personal and national income. The strongest correlation between the medal table. The ancient Greeks used to require athletes to assemble an Olympian for 3 months before the game so they could all train under the same conditions, eat the same food, and so on and so forth. In these discussions, I always like to say, well, to do that, I think every athlete in the world who's likely to compete in the Olympics should go live in Botswana, which is a kind of medium level, and I have family there, so I love Botswana, should go and live in Botswana and eat the same food, deal with the same medical conditions, and so on, to create a real level playing field. That's not going to happen.
Yes, I'm trying to understand the motivation of the IF and the IOC in imposing these rules that so disproportionately affect one specific demographic. Like, what's their motivation here? I also often think you need to follow the money. So, where is the money going here, or why are they doing this?
It's a deeply rooted first world patriarchal prejudice. I mean, what's amazing, Herman is a bad scientist. He has survey data from blood tests at major championships, and there are white European, Canadian, and American women in those surveys who have higher than prohibited levels of natural testosterone. Never saw one of those. They're all from the global south. The same panic occurred in the 60s when, you do this in the film, when these doughy Soviet athletes showed up and won everything. All of a sudden they just cranked up the tests.
And then they tested everybody, all of us, all women, all sports, every games, everybody.
Thank you for the film. It's so eye-opening for all of us. And I come from the producing side of documentaries, and my questions always look at, I see there was the little in red, the IOC did not decline to participate.
Correct.
Didn't a number of the clips come from IOC footage?
You mean the race footage?
Some of the race footage, some of the, yes. So somehow, how were you able to convince them and get your errors and omission insurance so that...
Fair use.
Yeah, I feel
Is that the premise that you
Fair
used?
use is that revolutionized documentary filmmaking, really.
But that's the premise on which you did this, the clearances.
Could you interview Seb? Could you get him in a different way, like Peter's saying?
No, I didn't interview Seb Coe. I paid for that footage. That wasn't fair use. Seb's interview was, it's on, you purchase it on, whatever, And there was one Olympic race, that was 2016, with Castor and Margaret and Francine at the very beginning of it. And under fair use, you can use, comfortably 9 or 10 seconds, and I'm just within the cutoff point. And I had 77 fair use items, and I had 86 personal use items that I had to adjust and deal with.
Well, I'm glad, because it's the way you can tell a story.
Yeah,
Yeah. I had to be
Good for you.
careful.
good
Right.
lawyers in LA, right?
Yep.
Donaldson,
We
Callis.
spoke to that in the session for Doc.
Yeah, that's right,
Yeah, I mean,
Good for you.
yeah. Lawyers
it's
can be helpful.
good weaving.
Yeah.
So you're limited to 10 seconds of fair use?
12
Well-
seconds, depending on, see, there's 1,000 different ways to do fair use. Not 1,000, there's 4. But you have to be able to set it up. You have to have, and you have to bookend it, basically. So if I lead into something, I can have 8 seconds. I can have someone say another comment. I can have another 8 seconds. I can have someone say something else. I can do 10 or 12 seconds. I can't remember
She's
what they gave
become
me.
the master of fair use.
I'm
Maybe
teaching-
that's not the right word here, but Phyllis is very skilled at fair using. Yeah.
Phyllis, I wonder if you could comment a little bit on what it was like to approach the women to participate in the film. Was it yes, absolutely, or did you find that
Yeah.
there was some hesitation, or did you, I would never say convincing, but what was that process like to speak to those individual athletes?
Well, I mean, when you have Peyoshni, she had been working with all of them for quite a long time, and so she she vetted me like 1,000 gajillion times, and then eventually they were doing something in Nairobi. They were actually interviewing a bunch of the women for the Human Rights Watch paper that was called "They're Chasing Us Away from Sport," and they were researching it at the time. And so Kyle Knight, who was from Human Rights Watch, but I couldn't tell anyone that they were there, that I was there. It was all very cloak and dagger. And I think because Peyoshni trusted me, then the women were open to at least meeting me. And then, okay. I mean, it was very tense when I met Annette. It was like a day or two after she had arrived in Berlin. And we were near the wall and in that bowl. We weren't there because we thought it looked good. We were there because we wanted to be either out in public or because we didn't want to interview her near her apartment because the IAF was trying to find her. The IAF had gotten into touch with Ugandan government, know what was going to happen, what's going to happen. And so it was all very nerve-wracking at the time. So we were trying to find a place that was neutral, that nobody would find us, and it was very intense, actually. And then imagine meeting Eva, and she invited us to meet her at home. And this was a big, huge difference from the home that she had when she was an athlete. And so we pulled in, and there's a water and trees and 2 rows of corrugated huts with no running water. Maybe 6 feet, dirt floor, no light, no protection. No protection. So when we left her, it was not safe, and she was being harmed, and we all came together and made sure she was safe eventually. But it's like, okay, thanks, have a good day. Call time's at 9. We'll bring you coffee. It's not like that, right? It's a very different, quiet.
I think that I've seen this film 3 or 4 times in audiences like this. I think that scene has most telling effect upon people in sport who watch that. That this, national star had been reduced by this persecution to a life so hard. It was very, very, very frightening to see that.
Sir?
I'm an alum of this college, and I remember in 1971, House Committee, I was a member, and we initiated the process of admitting women to this college, and we've succeeded. So, but after 50 years, I'm beginning to question this fight for equality, because I think women are selling this pretty short. You mentioned, Bruce, that it is a white male privileged, patriarchal society. Isn't sports a part of that system that we have created? And we are forcing women to become men and basically compete, or maybe like a woman in the category, but become more like men so we can exploit them more. I used to teach business and economics, and I looked at socioeconomics of feminism, and I have a feeling that the system wants women to become like men so they can make them work twice for half the wages. And where do you see this human rights, the idea of human rights, and all this part of that system?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah.
The women who should answer your question are the women who want to be athletes. And there are millions of them. And they don't think that they're becoming men by excelling in sport, not for a nanosecond.
I think that I'm really glad that you asked that, or that you posed that statement. Because sometimes people say things that people think, and they don't quite know how to formulate it. I think one of the most interesting things is that while I was a strong, powerful woman, and I, fought with Judy Chicago and Gloria Steinem, and I did all that when I was a kid, I actually never defined myself as a woman athlete or a female athlete. We were athletes just like everybody else. It's the system itself that creates the binary. It's the system itself that forces us. It's whatever sector, it's the sector itself that forces us to then defend ourselves. So it's not, every single human is unique, and all of our makeups, all of our biology, all of my advantage, the fact that I could, smoke 7 packs of cigarettes and I'd still be able to go run a 10K, my MVO2 just happens to be all that. Plus I have phenomenal fast twitch fiber, so I could probably beat you all in a 100-meter sprint right now in my sling at 63. So it's just the way, that's what a performance advantage is.
You couldn't beat Bruce.
I could never beat Bruce. And if I could, I would always let him win. So it's the idea that it's being gendered, and it's not that they want us to be men. It's creating fear that we might be. It's the fear mongering around that we might not be woman enough. Who gets to decide whether I'm a woman enough. Now, I didn't have a problem. I played field hockey. When my friends went to get gender tested, they were scared shitless, and they'd say, I don't know what you're worried about, pigtails, because they were looking at me going, well, I think you're probably okay. I don't, but some of my teammates,
No, I did a play on the 1976 Olympics, and one scene, which was improvised by women actors who went into the village and talked to women athletes about the test. And I fully attest to what Phyllis just said. They were scared to death. You prepare a major event, and yet you've got to pass a test based upon an aspect of your biology you've never thought about. And there's a scheduling process, and you're stressed about that. that was an eye-opener for me, that is for sure.
And then you have to wear a card. So tell me this isn't a Margaret Atwood book. Okay? So not only do I pass the test, I have a frickin' lanyard around that says I am a woman, and I have to show that every time I walk into an event. Yes, I am. Absolutely. I am a woman. Hear me roar. And there are women that are no longer with us. Yep.
There was never a case of a cisgendered man who was, quote, masquerading as a woman exposed in these tests, and Phyllis gave the numbers in that. But there are hundreds of women who were who experienced false positives, and their lives were wrecked.
Forever. Forever.
False positives for tests that had no scientific validity.
Question?
There we go. The panic behind whether someone is woman enough is just a hairbreadth away from panic about homophobic panic about lesbians. And it was actually very good in the film that you didn't blur anything. And I just wonder, did you consider including that? Did you purposefully make it just about athletes, just about gender, and not include, because that, you know, the
Sexuality?
panic behind that, the sexuality behind that?
That's a great question. I let the athletes lead, and I let them tell us their story they wanted to tell, that was important to tell, and sexuality did not come into the conversation at all, other than when Nanette talked about being othered, and if you're part of the LGBTQI community, you can get murdered, or you can be othered.
I didn't really mean specifically about the women and their sexuality. I meant really globally the panic about women athletes, whether they're trying to become men, whether they have enough estrogen or too much testosterone. It's hard to not believe that the root of that has some homophobia in it against lesbians. And whether you ever thought of looking at that, more at the root of, for the individual woman, I agree, it's nobody's business.
You know, yeah, I mean, I've got probably 60 hours of footage and recreations and historical stuff and about all these, on the floor of the cutting room, because just at some point, the narrative just had to kind of stay. There's of course a huge history of discrimination for how women look, and certainly in sport, it's hilarious because the body is the tool, and what the body looks like is incident to the actual function of the body to get you from point A to point B really fast, or really powerfully, or really lithely, or really, and as long as it fits into that category, then everything's, But I mean, I think that probably it just gets exasperated in sport because our bodies are exposed to everyone to look at, right? So the gaze is, look at my entire body. It's not like I'm going to an office where I'm, covered up. It's just, it's my whole gaze, the gaze is on me, And I mean, in the same way women get sexualized and get assaulted in sport, too.
The lady at the back, woman at the back.
Bruce, you mentioned trans athletes earlier, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about where trans athletes fit into this conversation. Obviously, this is not a story, to the best of my understanding. The story this movie tells is not a story about trans athletes, and it's important to recognize that these are women who always understood themselves in, But it does seem to me like there's a way to tell the narrative of why they deserve a place in sport, where you could say they have always been women, they are not men pretending to be women, which would be wrong, in a way that you could build this narrative that would exclude trans athletes. And to me, it seems like just as though these women deserve a place in sports, so too do trans athletes.
Well, it's a different film, though.
Of course, of course. I'm just curious because, Bruce, you mentioned trans athletes earlier. I'm curious where you see trans athletes fitting into the conversation.
Well, I would say the activist community has gone through a very interesting transition in the context of the transition of these debates in many parts of the world. I would say 10 years ago, when there was a lot of, there were accusations that women with high natural testosterone, DSD women, were really trans. And so we made a very important distinction using the language that you said a couple months ago. And what I'll call the right kept on pushing the identity. And then the IOC came along and wrote a policy which included women with differences of sexual development and trans in the same category. It's still their policy. And I think we swallowed hard and said, okay, we'll advocate for both groups in an umbrella policy of advocacy for gender self-identification. And if people are genuinely interested and are willing to deal with distinctions, then we'll make the distinctions. And so in the education we're doing in sports like track and field, we are advocating for both athletes with DSD and trans athletes, male to female trans, in very similar language. And I think we did go there right off the bat, and we got there reluctantly, but I think that's the right thing to do.
One last question, and then I probably should wrap.
So I have a working theory as to the motivation of the IF and the IOC and so forth. I'm interested in getting your reaction to this theory. It's not that they're racist or sexist or homophobic, but that they're capitalists, right? And that the eyeballs in Sweden and France and Germany are worth more than the eyeballs in Uganda or Nigeria and so forth, right? And it's really, as I said, follow the money. That's where the media is. That's where the sponsors are. That's how they can build the sport. And having, an overrepresentation of people of color from poor countries isn't as profitable as, leveling the playing field so that, they can have more European athletes. And I'm just wondering what you think of that.
Well, I don't think that, I think capitalism plays a huge role. I think they're capitalists and racist and misogynist and race-based, afraid people. The autonomy of sport. It was interesting the other night, we were doing a Q&A in London. I was on Zoom because I couldn't fly. And somebody asked me something and I said, oh, yeah, well, I took on big alcohol, then I took on big pharma, and now I'm taking on the IOC and World Athletics. Maybe I'll just take on the Vatican and the mafia. And the moderator, who was the top guy at Human Rights Watch, very seriously, and everybody went, oh, she's so funny. And he said, they're actually all the same. It's all the same. It's the same dynamic. It's the same. So sure, but you're just going to run into the same people, the same sport mafia that hurts friends, the same. So yeah, ultimately it's the bottom line, but the bottom line is being controlled by a bunch of white guys at the top, just like it is in so many other sectors. And I will tell you this, and I do have this on tape, and I will not disclose who said it because I don't want to hurt her. She said in an interview, and I didn't put it in the film because I didn't want to hurt her because I didn't blame her. But she said, in deference to something that I had said, well, Phyllis, you know that the IAAF paid for all of those operations. They paid for all of those girls to have those operations. They didn't have to pay themselves. The IAAF financed all of those operations, and they will continue to do so. They will pay for their operations and they'll pay for their medication. And like, see, they're not so bad. And that was the, in defense of me saying something. I was going to put it in the film. I didn't put it in the film. But I have it. Of mine, you know, along the way someone might need that. And I thought I'll just keep it to the side with the tape of Stefan Berman saying they're all men. They're all men. And imagine him saying they're all men, and Maria Patino, whose life was destroyed in 1983. She had a test, she was publicly humiliated, she's Spanish, she went home. Her country abandoned her, her church abandoned her family abandoned her frickin' fiance abandoned her university abandoned her, everything. She lost everything. Then, and everybody says, oh, why didn't she defend this or that? Because she was completely annihilated and then
isolated,
isolated, and then got some support and was reinstated over time, but not enough time. Like saying, we want to get these women back on the track. We probably, because we have a shelf life. I really couldn't beat any of you in a 100-meter dash. So we have a shelf life. And so Maria didn't get back on the track. She missed it by like 1/10 of a second, the Olympic trials. Fast forward, she becomes this da-da-da, she's a professor. She is welcomed back into the IOC. What an honor, you know? No, really, she feels it. She is so happy that her country and her mother and her father and her priest and her frickin' ex-boyfriend that's got 72 kids and living by himself in a hole is you know, and she's so proud that she's part of this IOC family again. Walks with pride, and she comes to this event with her friends, Berman and what's his face and all of them. Yeah, and she's got her suit on, and she goes up to speak, and Berman's on that side, and Maria's defending the regulations because we want it for fair play and level playing field, and Berman hasn't spoken yet, and Maria's, da-da. And she sits down, she's on the bad guy side, and she crosses her leg, and she looks out at everyone, and then Stefan Berman gets up, and he says, they're all men. Maria, don't think for a second, Maria.
Oh, my.
It was like out of a movie. She just shook and she stood up slowly. She didn't say a word, and she just did this to him, and then she left the room. And it was so, you know, yeah.
You can see how I said Phyllis Ellis is a force of nature. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for sitting through all that.
I didn't know that story.
I've never
What
told it before.
What a horrible story.
It was a horrible story.
Horrific.
But,
Poor woman.
oh my God, can you imagine? Yeah. And I went and spoke to her after.
I hope you'll come and watch more films and keep in
Next year,
touch.
my film's going to be about the little old lady that gardens, and she grows.
Thanks for